My name is Graham Calder, and I took a Bachelor's of Geography, specialized in human environment, and a minor in ecology. When I was at Concordia, I was very much involved with People's Potato. Shopped at the Frigobar a lot. I was very much in that community, and volunteered in the People's Potato Garden as well, quite a bit, which is how I kind of began down my journey and into this path of more secure food systems.
Great. So could you describe your involvement with the Concordia Tea Garden and maybe describe how that all came about, the genesis of it and your involvement?
Yeah, so at Concordia there's all kinds of small projects that have blossomed as a result of the Sustainable Action Fund, so providing students with the ability to financially move into developing a more sustainable educational system at Concordia. We took advantage of this and worked with also the Hive. At the time the Hive was really looking at sourcing and supplying as much of its food as they could locally. The first stage of the Hive was not to produce food, was just to produce teas and coffees. And so we were, baffled with this idea of how do you produce tea and coffee locally. Well, coffee is not really an option. Camellia sinensis tea is not really an option, but all the herbal teas, or a lot of them, we were able to grow locally. So we applied for a Sustainable Action Fund, me, Leonard, and Cameron Stiff. And we got the funding to basically create a sustainable permaculture designed tea garden that once planted would self-maintain itself, self-fertilize, and even self-irrigate, so that it was a very low maintenance perennial production system. So we used that design and we implemented it over the summer to begin really producing herbal teas for this project.
Could you actually describe how you developed the project and give us a timeline of how things actually came about?
Yeah, so we had the coordinator position that was funded by SAF was for, I can't remember exactly how many weeks, but it was for the summer. So we began in spring with the design project, and this was actually in congruence with one of my early permaculture design certification courses that we did. So we were at the same time working with People's Potato to redesign and reshape their garden. And the principles that we were using were really designing the pathways so that they're leveled and they end up being self-irrigation. So when it rains, they flood, irrigate the whole garden. So the same system was done in the mandala gardens that the tea garden was made out of. So these are circular gardens that have paths that are dug deep but level. And so when a rain comes, it fills up and it stays there and slowly soaks back into the garden instead of just running off into the sewers. So it ends up being also a buffer for rainwater during the wet season. We also put mulch on the garden so that it cools the soil and it keeps a better habitat for microbes and organisms, which in turn produce fertilizers to actually help the plants grow. So it doesn't require fertilizing. Because of these paths and the mulch, it doesn't require irrigating. Because of the heavy amounts of mulch, it doesn't require weeding. So it really reduces the labor, but for us the process was really to start with the design, figure out something that was appropriate, and then begin by digging, leveling these paths, putting down a biodegradable cardboard layer which will actually kill out the grass that exists and then attract a whole bunch of earthworms to start aerating the compact lawn that we were working on. And then we planted in guilds, which are basically beneficial associations of plants that work together. So you have, in vegetable gardening, we have tomatoes and basil. We have these ideas that the plants actually support each other and work in benefit. So we had this set up in the herb garden. We planted those and then put down the straw mulch as our final dressing. So this was all the work that was done. It took us pretty much all the summer. We had 2 interns from Satoshi's program, and they really helped us work a lot. And we had a couple other volunteers that helped us put in the garden.
Great. Could you actually give us a timeline of when things happened? I don't know if you remember the years or... Okay, maybe about.
It was a while ago.
What year?
When would have that been? I would say it was probably like 2010.
Okay.
Because I started my business 2009, and it was already going. Yeah, it must have been 2010 because I didn't start teaching until then. I think it was the summer of 2010. And really I remember it ending 2 days after my birthday, August 20th, and I remember this day very significantly because that day Concordia had paid a tree removal company to cut down a poplar, probably about a 50-foot poplar, and it was $500 cheaper for them to drop the tree directly on the garden than it was to make the tree miss the garden. So I remember working all summer long, starting in the spring, getting the garden ready, sourcing the plants, designing it, building all the materials that we needed, and then it was literally, we were touching it up and we had 1 bed left to finish. and they dropped the tree on the garden. And that was it was also my last day of my contract, and Leonard was to take it on for the next 3 weeks. But I remember being devastated. They came in, dropped the tree completely on it, and then the tree cutting crew left and the cleanup crew came, and they couldn't see that there was a garden. So they came in with their industrial leaf blowers and rakes and started shredding the garden, ripping out plants. And it was the same day that I was supposed to be interviewed about the project by the link. And the woman arrived, and I was just in tears, curled up in a ball, huddling some plants that I had saved. But the beauty of the garden was that because they were perennial, because it was already set up, and we intervened and stopped half of the cleanup process, the garden actually thrived. It actually, with a little bit of tweaking and replanting some of the plants that had been disturbed, it still took off and it still blossomed, and it's going still today.
Wonderful. Could you actually talk about the original vision that you had looking at this garden and developing the project?
Mm-hmm. So this project started as something small. Being able to provide teas for the hive, the Reality project, was really about not only providing herbal teas, but actually bringing people closer to their food cycle, understanding how much time it takes to grow that cup of tea. So the goal was for us to say, you know, these are teas that are located, 50 meters from your cup. It took us, this amount of time to produce that cup. So we wanted to have information pamphlets that really showed people a bit more of the reality of their food cycle and the food production system. For us, it blossomed from there and developed into a bigger project where we had identified in the area that we were allowed to use for this tea project was one of the only areas at Concordia that didn't have under contract landscaping management plan. So we were able to use that land without it conflicting with existing plans. And it happened to be right beside where the solar decathlon passive solar house was designed. So this was built for the 2005 solar decathlon, I believe, or 2003. Anyway, it was by the engineering students, but it had been abandoned for 5 years at that time. And we saw this, a demonstration house that was completely abandoned, tucked away behind the student residence and forgotten. And we saw it as an opportunity to really be demonstrating and showing people not only local food production, but local energy production, local tea production, and so much more. So our goal was strategically to build the garden and slowly envelop the house with gardens to a point where they couldn't refuse us, and they would allow us to occupy the space and actually begin teaching and using it as an educational hub. My goal at the time was to work with Satoshi and develop a permaculture course within Concordia so that we could start actually teaching from that solar house and using the garden as our demonstration model.
Could you actually talk about the relation with the administration regarding the space?
So in the beginning, I don't remember her name, I think it was Diane. She was very keen. For us, she came to us and she told us how it works. Basically, if there's a plan, there's a renegotiation of those contracts every 10 years, and so nothing would be possible unless we were able to find a spot on the land that didn't have a specific contract underway. And so she brought us the maps, she showed us everything that was there, and we found a spot that was perfect and adequate. Then when walking it together, I remember her saying with a big smile on her face that she dreamed of all of this just being wildflowers. So right away we knew that there was someone in the administration who understood where we were coming from, who had that vision of some alternative demonstration of space. She said it was a lawn that nobody ever used. Only people walked their dogs through it, and if it was wildflowers, it would be better for the birds and the bees and all the pollinators anyway. So right away we had someone who took us under their wing, really supported us, helped us to get the approval for that. And which has expanded. The original approval was for 2,000 square feet, and then the longer term vision was if they liked what we did and if we did it beautifully enough, they would allow us to keep growing and keep expanding, which is the case. The garden is now 5 times the size of what it originally was designed.
Mm-hmm. Could you talk about the relationship with People's Potato Garden and how you became involved in, I guess, what you did there?
Yeah, so the People's Potato for me was actually a salvation for many early years as a starving student. I went there, met a lot of friends, learned how to cook a lot of different things, and realized that they had this summer project where they had a garden space. So I started volunteering in the garden, and when seeing them with these monoculture rows, and they were weeding, they were watering, they were fertilizing, and using all standard agricultural techniques, to me it just didn't make any sense. The People's Potato, this alternative food system, using standard agricultural techniques as their educational model. So right away, with one of my courses, we proposed if we could use that space as a demonstration where we could actually do some work with the students, that we would redesign it in a permaculture fashion. So making it so that it self-fertilizes, self-waters, and maintains its own weeds. Then we would be able to do this exchange with them. So that's what we did. It was Dana, Arturo, and I, as well as Heather Nagy, who all worked together to really work and reshape this garden. We designed it again so the pathways would catch all the rainwater and flood irrigate. All the mulch kept the weeds away. The companion planting, it was harder to see in the garden what's going on, but it also meant that it was harder for the pests to find the foods that they were after. There weren't rows of their favorite food. So it was a really great success, and one day I remember getting an email from the coordinator, my friend Heather, and she said that the volunteers are complaining because there's a problem with the garden and they want me to come check it out. So I arrived thinking like, what happened? What did I do wrong, And it was a joke on their part because they said, basically the problem is, and they had plenty of time on their hands, they calculated for me, they said, you've reduced our weeding by 80% and you've reduced our watering by 95%, and now we don't know what to do in the garden because that's all we ever learned. And so the joke was on me. It was that when you don't weed your garden and you don't water your garden, well, what do you do with it when you're not eating? So we brought in people and specialists and started showing them different techniques and talked more about companion planting and started educating people on the model we were using. And we even brought in some local community members to teach us how to make traditional foods. We had a woman, Mira, who taught us how to make Iranian dolmes with the wild grapevines that were growing around. So it really became, to me, the progression of the educational model was, let's stop the weeding, stop the watering, and start learning a lot more about food and processing food, different traditional recipes and things like that. So that exchange started out in the People's Potato, and then it also moved over. So the interns were helping with that project, but they were also helping with our project. And together, actually, the People's Potato and the Reality Project were working side by side to really make this happen. They shared their tools with us, they shared their locker space, and we really worked at this together, which was really, really great.
Great. Could you expand upon the P3 Permaculture group that you're a part of? Maybe you could actually describe what it is, and then the relationship between, you were saying that you're doing teaching workshops there. Maybe you could describe the relationship between that and the food projects.
Yeah, definitely. So for me, when I came to Montreal, I came from a small town, Antigonish, in Nova Scotia. I was raised on 70 acres of farmland, and coming to this city, was immediately depressed, and I realized that it was actually a lack of green space, a lack of plants. And so when I started growing things in my home, it shifted my whole perspective. So immediately I learned that we need more green space in the city, and this is why I started studying environment. I ended up getting a job at Environment Canada doing animations and facilitating groups and really just giving workshops to people. And that gave me the ability to speak and share information. When I was graduating at Concordia, I discovered a technique called permaculture, whereby we use nature as a design science and we observe principles in nature to guide how we implement our designs for a sustainably abundant human society. And so it starts with food, right? Permaculture is sustainable agriculture and beyond. It's also sustainable social systems and beyond. And so with the knowledge from Environment Canada of being able to teach and share, and this need that I saw in Central and Eastern Canada of no courses being offered in this certification, I started doing garden designs, and I started teaching courses with students and really making it an accessible educational model. So our goal was to teach in a way in different time scales and different price ranges to make it really accessible to those who need to learn this and not just those who can afford it. So I actually launched my business a year before the Reality Project in 2009, and we've been going for 6 years now. And this year we actually hired staff and we became incorporated federally, and we have projects in Quebec, in New Brunswick, in Nova Scotia, and in the Yucatan. The model that we're using is really just teaching permaculture design, as well as doing consultations and designs with different clients. So when I was working with the Reality Project, we had a group of students who would come on weekends. They would come to the garden, and we would teach them all the different theory and hands-on parts of the course, and they would get a real chance to develop and build the urban agricultural techniques that you're now seeing more and more pop up throughout Montreal.
How would someone find out about your project?
Basically, our website is www.p3permaculture.ca, and online we have a bunch of different projects offered. We have everything from small workshops where you can learn how to build your own DIY water filtration system in your home or your own vertical window farm, to the certification courses, which are about 72 hours. We offer the certification course in a part-time model for those who want to stay in the city and are still working. So basically it's on weekends, and every third weekend is a break. And this is in the spring and fall. We offer one of these. And then we also offer 2 intensive courses a year, one in the winter and one in summer. This year's winter course is spread over 3 weeks, and it's going to be in the Yucatan. And we're actually very fortunate. We've been invited by a local family to come and do our project there, and they have a huge problem, which is the drought conditions that are exacerbated by climate change. And so the major focus of this course is actually climate change strategies for adapting, permaculture strategies for adapting to climate change. So we're going over 3 weeks to learn this certification course, and then we're doing a 2-week of implementation of adaptive agriculture and off-grid living. So, you know, the main things in terms of climate change for these people is extreme weather, which is going to break the water grid, it's going to break the electrical grid, so off-grid living is really important, having backup systems that function, and then alternative agricultures that don't depend on fertilizers, on heavy machinery, or any of this. So really looking actually back at more ancient Mayan techniques, which fortunately one of the family members is 75 years old and is still practicing agriculture from his ancestors. So it's a very interesting way for us to do it, but like I said, there's all different ways. We have a book club if you just want to be self-taught. You join our book club, get 20% off our orders. You can take workshops, so we can come to your house and help you with a design, or you can take the full-on certification course and join us in Mexico.
Wonderful. So looking at Concordia, I have like a little bit larger questions, I guess, regarding food systems. So one of them being, what would you think an ideal food system at Concordia would look like?
For me, the ideal food system at Concordia would be a system that encompasses many different approaches. Right now, what we see is student-run initiatives, and the students, through the access of funding through the Sustainable Action Fund, will develop projects and then propose these to the administration. And if you fall on the right person, it works. But often there isn't someone within the administration that's there to facilitate, to guide, and to move forward these projects. So there isn't actually, you just have to, as a student, find the right department and hope you catch them on a good day and pitch your project and hope that they get the support, or that they have even the power to allow you to move forward in that. So what I think is important would be that there is some kind of a department or some kind of a person responsible within the administration of Concordia, beyond this is a Sustainable Concordia group, but something more set into the administration, that their job is to look for opportunities to provide resources, to divert waste resources from the university, and really support and encourage the development of these projects. And not only support and encourage them, but put them on the front page. Concordia is really looking to be a green school, really looking at having this environmental image. And if they really want this to happen, they have to get in there and support the students. If they allow it to only be ground up, then when the students leave, they leave with their projects. But if they were actually to create an internal structure that supported, encouraged, and enveloped these projects, the projects would grow and the students would keep contributing to them even after their graduation. This has sort of happened with the Pickles Potato as well as the Frigo Vert, but there's many more projects that could have continued if they had had that in-house support through the administration.
What do you think about the multinational corporations around Concordia? I don't know if you're aware, but now instead of Chartwells, there's Airmark. So basically what I've seen is kind of a reincarnation of big multinational corporations that run the food services. I just wanted your opinion, what should be the role of these multinational corporations if you determine that there is a role altogether?
For me, I see a huge conflict. In terms of education, the purpose of going to university is to build your own internal capacity to be a more knowledgeable, better human, better citizen in your country, on your planet, right? This idea that we're building a better society through education. If what we provide those students as they're growing, as they're learning, as they're blossoming into their passions that we're hoping will, challenge climate change and redefine social structures and bring about better healthcare systems, if we're feeding them garbage food that costs a lot of money, we're completely counteracting and undermining their ability to move forward. That's like having a baby and hoping that your baby's going to grow big and strong and feeding it, you know, Big Mac smoothies all of its life. Like, this is not going to be a strategy that in the long term will actually fit the goal of the university itself. If the university supported and encouraged food structures that had as a mandate not to make profit off of the students and basically off of their health, the lack of health that's provided by low quality food, they're making a profit, but instead to provide accessible, affordable, high nutrient density foods to their students, their grades would be higher, the reputation of the university would therefore be higher, the projects and numbers and impact of those projects would be greater, therefore the media presence of that university would be better as well. But the overall image, health, and impact of Concordia University would be dramatically improved if the fuel going into the minds of those students was of high quality and low cost.
So what would you recommend to somebody that's new at Concordia that wanted to get involved in food politics?
To not buy a meal pass as a first step, and second, to join up with the Concordia food system, the Concordia Food Coalition, really, to really take some courses with Satoshi Ikeda. He has a very avant-garde new approach to understanding, analyzing, and moving forward in the direction of these projects. To look immediately first year at how you can get involved with some of the projects that are happening with the Sustainable Action Fund and start to use them. I discovered it only in my last year at Concordia, and I was there for 5 years. The amount of projects that we could have done that would have benefited the students and the community as well as the university would have been, could have been huge. So I think there needs to be almost, and this is something we worked on as one of my internships with Sustainable Concordia, was developing the alternative guide for resident advisors, so that when students come into residence, they're shown that there are all these different options for food. There's the meal card, but there's also people's potato and frigobar. There's, there's these student extracurricular activities, but there's also these, more socially driven economic activities or whatever, social activities. So I think what we need again is, it needs to not be on the kind of back burner of Concordia, that there's these amazing social projects, food projects, and community building grassroots projects. They need to be brought into the limelight, if you will, and really supported and highlighted, because it took me 3 years to find them. My career now is permaculture design, teaching, educating, and designing systems that are as small as a balcony and as big as 500 acres. My whole career is rooted in this that I only discovered in third year university. Imagine where I would be today if I had found this 3 years prior, right? So the actual future of our students and the future image of this university really depends on how they support, encourage, and grow these opportunities.
So I have one more question left, and it's usually a little bit more awkward, but it's more personal related. I'm just wondering if you have any personal stories or anecdotes that you'd like to share about your experience at Concordia and the food systems.
I think for me, one of the devastating ones was with the garden, realizing that they were willing to let the garden happen as long as they could write articles about it and so on and so forth. But when it came to putting $500 in to save our garden space that cost $5,000 of student money through the Sustainable Action Fund, they wouldn't have it. So the lack of actual on the ground real support for these projects, and the fact that it's only where the camera shines, is a real big problem. Because the more these great projects are accidentally squashed by a tree that falls on top of them because the university doesn't care, the more these students are going to be discouraged and not continue to build these projects, and the more fragile and frail those student projects are going to be. How long did it take to get the hive off the ground? How long does it take to expand the reality projects? How many years did it take for us to be able to turn the solar house into an actual demonstration site? There still isn't even very much admin funding to get that thing back up and running. But we are in a generation of solar and alternative energy. We need to be stepping out in the forefront of that. So for me, I think it was realizing that there's a huge amount of fire, there's a huge amount of energy, there's a huge amount of passion in students and these student projects, and it's like, you know, throwing a handful of water into a blazing building that's on fire. It just, this intention gets dissipated and gets absorbed by the Concordia machine. And so on one end, Concordia has this grassroots green image that they want to promote, but internally they're not even supporting the seeds that they're incubating that could make them actually blossom into their own vision. So what they need to do is really turn around and look inside and support, value, and encourage the students and teachers that are supporting this.